Hello, everybody. This is Ralph Martin from RJ Quality Consulting, and I'd like to ask you a quick question. If an assessor asked tomorrow, should show me objective evidence that this method you have is fit for purpose, would you be able to answer that question? Today, what I'd like to do is show you a practical workflow, metrics, and documents to be audit ready. As many of you know, I am a certified ISO 17025 assessor, and I do know a thing or two about ISO 17025. And in today's video, what I'd like to do is talk about the ISO 17025 method validation as it pertains really to clause 7.2 of the standard. Now, if you're watching this video on YouTube, right in the description box, you can read my full blog post on method validation, and it really looks a lot like this here. So it's entitled ISO 17025 Method Validation, Ensuring Laboratory Competence and Reliability. And you can go ahead and read the full blog post. In this video, what I'm going to do is summarize this blog post and give you some tips and tricks on how to meet the requirements of section 7.2 of ISO 17025. And we'll even switch back and forth between this blog post, the presentation, and also the standard itself. I always like to go to the standard itself to show you what the actual requirements are. But in this blog post, I talk a lot about method validation, some of the understanding ISO 17025 method validation. We have a good video on here from Perry Johnson. As many of you know, I am an assessor for Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation Incorporated, and here's a really good video on that. We talk about the definition of method validation. What's the difference between method validation and method verification and method selection, which is really what section 7.2 of the standard is all about. And in this, I also give you a step in a method validation process that you can follow, and then how to select appropriate validation methods, key components of a method validation, explanation of key terms, and measurement uncertainty, practical examples of method validation, and some case studies and some challenges and solutions. You can go ahead and read all about that in this blog post. Just click the link in the description box and you can read this full blog post. And I encourage you to do that. But what I'd like to do in this video is really go through a preview or presentation of method validation and kind of show you a workflow. So really the agenda of this is, we'll cover definitions, validate versus verify, for example. We'll talk about a 7-step workflow, the key performance characteristics, what documents an assessor would really expect during an ISO 17025 accreditation assessment, some common pitfalls, and then I also offer you some resources available. I have a free internal audit checklist and a masterclass, which I'll show you at the end of the presentation. So let's start with, first of all, what is method validation? Really, method validation is generating objective evidence that a method is suitable for its intended use under the requirements of Section 7.2 of the ISO IEC 17025 standard. You're demonstrating accuracy, precision, and known uncertainty across the intended range with clarity on the matrix, the measure and range, decision rule, and reporting limits. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. First of all, validation versus verification. So basically, if verification confirms a standard method that you are utilizing, for example, if your laboratory primarily utilizes published standard methods, such as a USP standard method or an ASTM standard method, an AOAC standard method, then really what you're required to do under section 7.2.1 is verify that you can generate the correct results. This could be done through things like verifying your results through a reference standard, showing your results, maybe running reference standards in like say 25 of them, and then number crunch your results to show that you are able to generate the right result. And basically what you're doing is you're confirming the performance in your lab with your equipment and your staff to show that you can get the right result based on that published method. That is what verification is from a practical standpoint. What validation is and what it applies to is when a laboratory uses non-standard or modified and laboratory developed methods, or a partial revalidation may be needed after changes. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a laboratory and you're basing your method on a USP or an ASTM method, but you're modifying it. Depending on the differences between your modified method and the actual standard method, you will need to partially validate what the differences are. And really the differences between a full-blown method validation and a verification is, in a validation, you're validating the whole method to make sure that it meets the requirements of the standard, and also that you can generate the right results. So you will have verification data within a method validation, but you're validating that the method itself is a suitable method to meet the requirements of your customer. There is a big difference between verification and method validation. And from an application standpoint, it would be whether your laboratory is using a standard method or an in-house developed method. In that case, you would need to go through more of an extensive method validation, as it indicates in section 7.2.2, which I'll get into a little later when I show you the requirements of the standard itself. So also, let's talk about this 7-step validation workflow. If you are doing a full-blown method validation, not just a verification, you want to first define the requirements in scope, as you see in the first box there. Then you want to write a validation protocol with acceptance criteria and a statistics plan. That would be, objectives, acceptance criteria, statistics, and the actual plan. Then you would prepare your materials, such as your certified reference materials, your controls, calibrated equipment that you're going to be using in the method, and any extraneous SOPs or technical work instructions, and ensure that your equipment is calibrated. And you would mention that in your workflow. Then you would execute studies with adequate replicate data across days, operators, instruments as relevant to show that you're able to generate the right result. That would be step 4 of the process. You want to execute studies, replicates across days, operators, instruments as relevant to the method itself. Then on step 5, you want to evaluate your performance characteristics. And then step 6, you want to analyze the data that you're generating. Things like statistics, your measurement uncertainty, regression, any outliers that you maybe received during the data acquisition, and explain those outliers, and actually show the data. And then step 7 is report and approve. You want to have some sort of method validation report, like a cover page that shows that, we approve this method based on these criteria, and the traceability results we got based on comparing it to a certified reference material, and the results versus what the criteria of the results or the specifications dictated within the method, and then add some sort of quality management sign off that it has been approved by the appropriate personnel. You also want to show any training or change control within the method itself. The next slide, we talk about key performance characteristics. So basically what we're talking about here is selecting metrics that are appropriate to the method and risk. We're talking about accuracy and precision, repeatability studies or repeatability data that you've ran more than just one sample and or certified reference standard. You're able to duplicate your results through like 20 to 30 different results. Um, and intermediate results as necessary depending on the method, and the ability to reproduce your methods, specificity and selectivity, linearity and range, LODs, LQCs, or LOQs with a defined statistical basis associated with it, robustness and ruggedness, and also measurement uncertainty with a clear statement of your measurement uncertainty. In your method validation, you should be defining what your measurement uncertainty is, and how you were able to generate that measurement uncertainty with 95% confidence that you agree, that your results are correct with a K factor equaling 2. That is kind of the measurement traceability and measurement uncertainty sort of go hand in hand. It is within the measurement, or it is within the method validation, that you determine what your measurement uncertainty is. Then we get into really acceptance criteria. Here's just kind of an example of accuracy. We want to maybe, depending on the method, target 95 to 105% mean within the limits. Outlier tests applied to this. Repeatability. This is kind of an example here. I've also put this in a table format to show you. These are strictly just examples. Repeatability, or RSD, could be n is greater than or equal to 6, standard deviation mean less than or equal to 3%, for example. Then we would define the linearity. It might be above or equal to 0.995. Residuals, random, lack of fit, with a p-value greater than 0.05. This is kind of some examples here. LOD and LOQ defined within the method, appropriate statistics. And here what I'm showing you is this information in an acceptance criteria table that you would want to put within your method validation. Now, also the thing you want to do here is we're going to talk a little bit about what is known as a decision rule. So if you have a requirement that is, for example, say pass or fail, or some sort of qualitative statement that is pass, or fail, or pass fail criteria, you want to define what your acceptance criteria for that pass or fail actually is. Like, for example, in a microbiological test, you might say negative. Negative meaning less than 10 colony forming units. Negative is defined as less than 10 colony forming units, for example, would be that. And then you would want to indicate what your decision rule is based on uncertainty of measurement. We are passing it based on pass fail. Um, let's say pass was above 10. Well, above 10 plus or minus what? And how did you determine your measurement uncertainty based on your pass fail criteria? You want to define that. That's what they mean by a decision rule. What is your decision rule regarding uncertainty of measurement when you should have a pass-fail criteria, for example? And then that is an example of a table that you might want to put in your method validation. And then documents that assessors would expect to see in an audit. First of all, they would expect to see some sort of validation protocol with acceptance criteria. Validation protocol means a procedure. What was your validation procedure that you used to show that that you've approved this method validation? The raw data itself, so you would have like a validation protocol, maybe a cover sheet with the raw data underneath that with statistical outputs, uncertainty evaluation and the statement of uncertainty, the validation report mapped to the criteria. What is the acceptance criteria? That could be a specification delivered to you by the customer or within your parameters, what you intend to meet, what are the criteria of pass or fail. An approved SOP linked to equipment used. So you want to have not only the method validation, but the method itself. And then training and competence records to the method validation and to the method. And then if there's a change control used to as the method developed and evolved into different versions, for example, you would want to have some sort of change control history associated with that. Some of the common pitfalls that we find: no or vague acceptance criteria. Where there's no acceptance criteria, then it's hard to validate a method. Missing CRM traceability, like a certified reference material that was used to determine that you were able to generate the correct result. Only repeatability evaluated, no intermediate precision. In other words, there was no intermediate precision contained within the repeatability studies. Weak linearity checks, for example, no residual data involved, and a lack of fit for purpose statement within the method validation. No measurement uncertainty statement. That's a big one. Um, Method validations have to have a measurement uncertainty defined and determined. Otherwise, it's really, by definition, not a measurement or not a method validation. And then a validated method that doesn't equate to the actual uh, procedure or method itself. The validation needs to correspond with the method that you're validating, and it needs to be a one-on-one fit. Um, so that's really it. What I'd like to do is kind of, before I go to the last slide, I want to show you really the standard itself as it meets the requirements of um, the standard in section 7.2. So what I have here is, I always like to show this in my video, but these are general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratory. This is the standard itself. So if you go to section 7 point, let me get this. Sometimes when I'm using the share software, this gets a little finicky. But if I go down to section 7.2, where method validation resides, the section 7.2 talks about selection, verification, and validation of methods. The standard requires, first of all, that the laboratory use appropriate methods. Now, if your laboratory is using method or a USP method, then that would be considered an appropriate method. Um, and you're selecting that method. If it's an in-house method, then you want to ensure that it was appropriately validated and that you selected that method based on what the customer is asking you to run for them, for example. That would be selection and verification. That would be methods. The verification of methods, like I mentioned, applies to whether you're using really a standard method. You want to verify method verification. Section 7.2.1 deals with selection and verification. Um, And here there's a note that says international, regional, or national standards or other recognized specifications that contain sufficient and concise information on how to perform the laboratory activities. They don't really need to be supplemented necessarily with technical procedures. You could use the standard method as is. It is considered validated if it is a standard method. If it's a USP method, it was validated through the USP method process itself, for example. You would just need to verify that you were able to get the right result, and that is typically based on using reference standards. So that's what section 7.2.1 is all about. Section 7.2.2 is validation of methods, and the laboratory shall validate non-standard methods, like not using a USP or ASTM method, and that's where you would need a full-blown method validation. And validation can include procedures for sampling, handling, transport, and test of calibration items. The technique used for method validation can be one of or a combination of the following: calibration or evaluation of bias and precision using reference standards or reference materials, systematic assessment of the factors influencing the results, testing method robustness through variation of control parameters, such as incubator temperatures provided within the method itself, comparison of results achieved with other validated methods, interlaboratory comparisons, and evaluation of measurement uncertainty. That is a big one. And then we talk about the laboratory shall retain records of the validation. So the standard requires that you retain records that you validated the method and that you were able to show that you're able to generate the right results. So that is really the heart of method validation. Again, I encourage you to read the full article on my blog post to get all the details of method validation, and also some of the resources that I offer. I'll show you on this page. I do offer a free internal audit checklist, and I will leave the link below here in the description box of the video. I'll show you what this uh, looks like on my blog here. So here you just fill in your name and email, and then you can get my ISO 17025 internal audit checklist and gap analysis tool. This tool will allow you to do a complete internal audit, and by filling out the checklist, you could use that as your internal audit record, because when you do become accredited to ISO 17025, the accreditation body will want to see an internal audit record, and they will want to see a record that you were able to meet the requirements of the standard. They want an internal audit record that shows you audited to the clause elements of the standard, and this checklist provides that. And then also another thing I offer is an Implementation Masterclass. So in the Masterclass, what happens when you click on the link is you'll come to a page that gives you all of what you're offered in the Masterclass. I do a complete course on the implementation of ISO 17025. And within this course, it's not just a course, and the video walks you through what you actually get. But you also get a fully customizable ISO 17025 quality manual. It's a 45 to 50 page document that you can customize to your laboratory, and it'll be a complete quality manual. I also give you all the required policies and procedures and forms for all the required policies and procedures that come or that are required through the ISO 17025 standard for each clause. And then every mandatory policy for compliance. These are templates that are easily utilized to really customize to your laboratory. You also get a step-by-step training video. There's 7 in-depth modules that walk you through how to use these policies and procedures in the quality manual, intro, history, and course orientation. We cover the whole standard in a clear, precise practical guidance. I also give you an internal audit and management review training along with all the proper forms that you would need. And also, one of the things the standard requires is that you conduct an internal audit through an internal audit program with trained internal auditors. When you take this course, you will get a certificate of training for an internal audit training by a certified internal or external auditor that you could use that would fulfill the requirements of training as an internal auditor. You get all of this in my masterclass. I have half price going on right now through the month of November. It's normally a $400 one time. It's on sale now for $200, and it gives you everything you need to implement ISO 17025. And also, I also offer a free 45-minute consultation from my website. When you go to the blog post that I showed you, you'll be able to, here's where you would sign up for your internal audit uh, checklist. And then you can book a free 45-minute consultation with me. Free 45 minutes, I can advise you on anything you want to talk about. And then I also I do offer some consultancy services, and we could talk about that during the 45-minute consultation. And here's a link to my masterclass as well. So those are some of the resources that I offer. And then also there's a link in this description on this full blog article. And if you have any questions, you can leave a comment in this video, or you can also leave a comment in the blog post itself. I always answer these comments within at least 24 hours. And then go ahead and in the description box, I have the links to all of these resources I'm talking about. And again, go ahead and look at the blog post on method validation. You'll get a clear step-by-step explanation of method validation. And then again, you can always reach out to me via YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I have a lot of different videos on a plethora of different areas of the ISO 17025 standard and other standards as well. I talk about ISO 9001, AS 9100, ISO 17020, risk management, and quality management in general. This is Ralph Martin signing out. You make it a great day.